Here's a question from user 73. Would you consider globalisation to be economically efficient? If that's so, it should happen naturally on its own. What role then do you think the WTO needs to play? Why is it necessary?
It would happen naturally on its own if governments didn't subsidise and have rules and protect local industry. And they all do, or many do, most do. But we've cut a lot of that out through agreements between countries. It sets the rules, the gold standard, that countries will abide by and then accept a disputes mechanism and its outcome. And it's imperfect. But it's, you know, let's face it, the last 60 years we've created more wealth on the planet than all of history put together. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. And the most unpleasant, poorest places are the least globalised. You go to North Korea, you go to Burma, you go to the bad places that are locked up, that won't let people purchase, won't let people vote, will not let people participate. They're the darkest places on the planet. Zimbabwe, the most progressive, open societies, are those that do better. So this is a good.
So,
North Korea and Burma, of course, are not part of it because they can't join.
They can't join. So, if they were to become more globalised, by what you're saying, things would improve in those countries. How do we go about doing this? Well,
we negotiate trade rounds, and we're hopefully not in the middle. We've been negotiating for 10 years in the Doha round that I launched when I was Director General. That in agriculture got the capacity to give back to Africa 5 times more than all the overseas aid debt write-offs put together. Of course, Africa is divided. There are those food importers and food exporters, but it has the potential to do that. So hopefully those negotiations will be concluded. Any negotiation is a disappointment. They never go far enough. They're the best you can do, and you bank what you've done.
Okay. There's a question from Corey849 about Doha. So he says, thanks very much for doing this. I'd like to get your unvarnished thoughts on Doha. Any hope of ever concluding the round? What do you think is the greatest stumbling block to get a deal? What do you think will be the repercussion of a failed round? And what would you most like to see come out of Doha?
Well, the repercussions of absolute failure are horrendous. If the WTO has become like the League of Nations, you just see more explosions of regional trading blocs, bilateral deals, which are happening now, and they're not free trade agreements. Many of them are preferential trade agreements. That puts real power in the hands of some politicians who will eventually use it. History tells us that. And of course, everyone wants to do a free trade agreement with America or China. Who wants to do a deal with Papua New Guinea or Botswana? So the small guys are elbowed out. Can it be done? Well, good people are working very hard. What stands in the way is, as always, vested interests. Whenever you have government giving money to businesses or businesses getting protection and subsidies, bad things happen. Politicians who get donations, bureaucrats who graze, and they will fight change. And they exist in most societies, more in some than others. But you know, the rich countries spend $1 billion a day making food dearer to their people by their subsidies. That squeezes out jobs in Latin America, Africa, and to my country to a lesser degree. One of the reasons our fathers set up the UN and the World Trade Organization was they were fearful of the growth of hostile trading blocs. And in 1984, in George Orwell's book, he predicts war between the sort of Eurasian, European and American trading blocs. I mean, it's a work of fantasy. But not in my life, hopefully not in yours. These things could go real sour real quick with bad politicians and bad business people getting together. These business people, a lot of business people don't support free trade and free enterprise. They support private enterprise. That is their privileges, their perks, their handouts from the government. And one of the unrecorded, except for my book, issues is that competition drives out corruption by making it transparent, putting it value on it, and people bidding in the shop place. You want to buy that product, you want to buy that product, you should have the choice. But when a politician gets in the way, he says, there's going to be import licences, only going to be 1,000 of these available, up goes the price, in goes the commission. Very bad.
Okay. Well, let's head into corruption. There's a couple of questions here regarding that. Right. This guy's called Monkeys Ate My Ego. And he says,
Sounds a good guy.
Acton said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. How have you avoided corruption, and how can we ensure that others in power avoid it? When and how have you felt pressure to act against your own beliefs?
Well, you start from the ethical base of your own personal beliefs, and I'm lucky enough to live in a society and a democracy where you're not challenged much. Where I think you have to compromise is if you're with a team. In government, you have to bring along your party, then you've got to bring along your parliament, then you've got to bring along your cabinet, then you've got to bring along the people. So all that means corruption, because none of us, not corruption, compromise, because none of us are dictators, and that would be even worse. What if I did get my own way? Because I've changed my views on things over 30 years. That's the problem. The World Trade Organisation is an intergovernment organisation. It represents the governments, and it doesn't tell governments what to do. Governments tell it what to do, what they decide to do. You can nudge it and push it, which I did in certain areas to make sure the little blokes have a voice and to try and balance it off. But in the end, governments will decide, and the WTO works on consensus, no Security Council, so the small guy can block everything. And they have. We blocked for Bulgarian yogurt at one point. But that's how it is. And bananas from St. Lucia, a huge issue. There's only a few thousand people living there, but for them it was a big issue. And they had a very sophisticated ambassador who, he fought, and so he should. It was his country's interests. So you've got to balance and try and do a deal. I'd like a huge deal, but you can only do what governments allow you to do, and you can only do what will work, which is enormously disappointing. But then again, the Director General isn't the boss. The governments are the bosses. And that's how it should be. It's not a world government.